Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mountain Lake Journal. I'm Tom Alek. This week, we're sitting down with three journalists who cover the news in northern New York. We're going to talk about some of the stories making headlines here in the North Country, as well as at the state capitol in Albany. Joining us this week, Pat Bradley, who is the North Country Bureau Chief for WAMC, Northeast Public Radio. Alek, LaShomb, who is the Plattsburgh Bureau Chief for WCAX-TELEVIsion. And Carly Newton, who reports for the Plattsburgh Press-Republican newspaper. Welcome. It's nice to see you all. We appreciate you being here.
Good to see you, Tom.
One of the biggest stories has been the soaring utility bills for many customers here in the North Country and across the state. Many have seen their bills skyrocket in recent months with the cold weather this winter. They're using more power, and that's putting more demand on supplies, which is dramatically driving up costs. The North Country's new Assemblyman Michael Cashman has made this one of his top priorities for his first year.
Energy affordability remains a pressing concern for families across the North Country. That is why I introduced 09426 with bipartisan co-sponsorship from Assembly members. This bill would cap electric rates at 2.5%. It would put a major pause for 180 days for independent audits to occur. It requires clear, itemized utility bills and no hidden fees. And it would establish a utility accountability audit unit with enforcement powers. This shouldn't be a partisan issue. It's about people struggling to pay their bills and keep their families safe. Every New Yorker deserves affordable, predictable electric bills, and I'm committed to pushing doggedly on this topic.
Michael Cashman held a press conference this past week that you all covered to talk about the first bill he has introduced in the Assembly that he says will address at least some of the issues and try to help stabilize costs. Some of the customers, you've all talked to customers there, some of the customers say they're seeing the highest utility bills they've seen in years, if not ever.
This is the highest electric bill I've ever had in 35 years.
Back in November, my electric bill went from $199 a month to $230 a month. And at that time, I thought it was the debit I owed for the year because I'm on the budget plan. But that amount has continued into 2026. And I don't know why, because the electric company does not give us explanations of why the bill has gone up. We hear that their cost has gone up, but they never translate it into why our bill has gone up. And my concern is, being on a fixed income, will this be a continuing kind of situation? Will I be confronted with higher bills as the year goes on?
We have friends that are on fixed incomes, and they can't afford it. And I don't know how long we're going to be able to afford it.
I talked to one couple who said their latest utility bill, and this is from the city, not from NYSEG or
City of Plattsburgh, which has lower electric rates.
Yeah, and they're seeing hikes even in the city of Plattsburgh. She said she got the highest electric bill in 35 years in this last month.
For a lot of people, again, some of the highest increases they've had on their bills. Other people are just more so confused about why the rates are going up. It's more so the transparency aspect. Yeah. You hear from everybody, it's, well, this is going up 15 or this is going up 20, but my bill's not really telling me why that's the issue.
And is that part of Michael Cashman's bill, that they have to be more transparent about, has to break down all of the costs? Is that part of Michael's bill?
I believe so. Yeah, he said that his bill would require clearly itemized utility bills and no hidden fees. Now, how he's going to avoid hidden fees, I'm not sure.
And Cashman's bill also would place a cap on yearly rate increases at what, 2.5%?
2.5.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, it's a start, right? You know, anything helps at this point because it's just, for a lot of people we're hearing, it's just out of control. And Cashman's been meeting with NYSEG officials, trying to get to the bottom of why this is happening. And I think this bill in the Assembly is a start in the right direction. I know it's got bipartisan support so far.
The Republicans, though, have come at it from the angle of they're saying that a chunk of this, the higher prices, are coming from the climate change law that passed back in 2019 and mandates that have been put in place that are now people are getting taxed for it. They're paying for these mandates and calling on Hochul and Democrats to delay those, to back off on having those in place.
Yeah, and that's something I did ask Assemblyman Cashman about is, the other side of the aisle's rationale or reasoning they believe for why the rates are going up. Cashman essentially saying, yes, he acknowledges that they may be saying that it may be some policies like, the electric school bus policy or anything else, but really it kind of boils down to the grid itself and what can the grid handle, what's the demand on the grid right now. But going back for a minute to the 2.5% cap that we're discussing, even though that's a cap, that doesn't mean anything above that can pass through. So I mean, if a utility company does come back and say, well, we have 2.6%, it goes through a pause for 180 days, and then the Public Service Commission could approve that. So I don't think the cap is an end-all be-all, but like you said, definitely a good start in that area.
And both the Democrats and Republicans in the Assembly have sent letters or drafting letters and getting people to sign on to letters that would have the governor declare what, an energy emergency, an energy crisis?
That's my understanding, yeah. Two different letters sent in the Assembly, the Republicans first sending one, and then of course the Assembly Democrats, Republicans calling on the governor for that energy emergency. And that seems to be picking up some support, at least up this way. Assemblyman Michael Cashman saying he would support that at this point, if that's something the governor did declare.
You also all covered what's become a clever way for the United Way to call attention to the growing threat of homelessness as more families struggle to pay for their housing, their rent, their mortgages, along with all the other bills and expenses that they have. The United Way hosts its annual Kiss the Cow event, where community and political leaders help collect donations by kissing one of the cows at the Minor Farm, while getting the word out about what the United Way and its partner organizations are doing to combat homelessness and try to assist these families that are struggling to get by, and in many cases, living paycheck to paycheck. Are we seeing more and more families? Are we hearing from the United Way that they're hearing from more and more families that are having a tough time paying all the bills?
I think over the last year, seeing just what's been happening here in the county, I mean, they put up the warming shelter, of course. That seems to be a reaction to the growing needs of that unhoused population. And we know the point in time count that was also higher, the count that looked at how many people are unhoused here in the county. Asking John Bernardi over there, what is the biggest cost people are dealing with right now? And the costs that seem to be growing is what we just discussed, electric rates, but of course bills, rent and housing payments.
And food and food. Fuel and everything. So when you've got rising cost, does the money that they would necessarily spend on rent and the mortgage now perhaps have to go to the utility bill?
Of course, they've had the Alice situation, so it's not just people that are unemployed, it's people who are employed and they still can't afford these things. And one of the comments that John Bernardi from the United Way made that kind of caught my ear is that 1 out of every 2 people will need help at some point. That's how bad it's getting, with, as you mentioned, all of those varied costs factors. And that's kind of a scary statement too.
And the big goal for them really is preventing homelessness. And to do that is helping out with these bills that they're struggling with so they can pay maybe the mortgage and they don't have to worry about the utility bills for the month. Because he said that's really the best preventative action preventing homelessness is making sure they don't get to that point to begin with.
Another story you have all covered is the renewed talk of Lake Placid once again bidding on hosting another Winter Olympics, fresh off the Milan Cortina Winter Games that just wrapped up this past week. There is an assemblyman from downstate in Brooklyn, Robert Carroll, who's pushing the idea of New York State bidding on hosting a third Winter Olympics, and much like Italy did just the past couple of weeks, hosting the games in several locations. His idea, a joint New York City Lake Placid bid, where skiing and sledding would be up in Lake Placid and where other events, probably skating and perhaps opening and closing ceremonies, would be in New York City. Now, former North Country Assemblyman Billy Jones seems to be weighing in on this idea. He likes it. He thinks it's a good idea.
They wrote a joint letter on it. So yes, both of them support this idea. And it does seem to be gaining ground. I mean, there was a forum in late January at Mount Van Hovenberg that brought together ORDA, reporters, former Olympians, to talk about how feasible is this? What do we have to do if we can put in a bid within 20 years? What's not feasible? You know, and all of the practicalities to potentially having a joint Olympics between New York City and Lake Placid.
Did Milan Cortina put a lot of wind in their sail, because they look at it and they're 5-6 hours apart and hundreds of miles apart, and did they look at that and say, wow, they pulled it off and by most accounts did a great job?
Yeah, I think they did look at the distance between the two. It'd be roughly 5 hours between those two cities, and saying, hey, that's the same out here. I think we can do it something where it's alpine and then also a more industrial area between these games. Our former Assemblyman Billy Jones, he had legislation on this back in 2022 to create a commission to look at this. So it's been drummed up for a while now to get support for this. Senator Steck has a bill right now that's in committee that would create a commission with 13 members to look at this for bringing the games back here. Of course, ORDA would be at the head of that commission, and then it would be unknown who those 13 members would be. But I think, once you get into a real conversation about making that a possibility, they could turn to, they already had the Site B plans for the sliding games if that were to come here during this last Olympics. So they could definitely turn to that and look at some of the logistical stuff. But I think the major questions would be cell service. How do you work around that? Of course, notorious here in the Adirondacks for being poor. And also transportation. How do you get the buses back in here?
Which was such a headache back during the 1980 Winter Games, and it's the same routes going in. That has not changed in 45, 46 years.
Part of the discussion, you've got basically two roads from the north and the south coming into Lake Placid. So even if you split, between New York City and Lake Placid, you're still going to have crowds and crowds of people trying to get to Lake Placid. And as you mentioned, the 1980 Olympics had a few problems with transportation. Yeah. The roads aren't going to change, so what do you do? And that's part of the reason why they want an exploratory committee.
And has Michael Cashman signed off on this? You talked with Michael about this, Carly?
Yeah, we talked to him last week, or the week before, and he's supportive of it, but he did acknowledge that if the Olympics were to come back to Lake Placid and to New York City, he said that there would need to be major changes, infrastructure upgrades, like you said, cell phone upgrades, stuff like that, because it's just not possible to do what they did in 1980 now, as it currently is.
And the state has spent hundreds of millions of dollars upgrading the Olympic facilities. Are they in good enough shape where they would be able to host the games again, or would there be a lot of money that would have to be spent on the Olympic facilities in Lake Placid?
I think right now, no question for the sliding facilities, of course, if they were going to be Site B. But again, if we're talking 15 years, if that's when they get the bid, this is something I had asked ORDA. I'd asked, what are we looking at in terms of upgrades? Are we talking that these facilities would have to be redesigned, altogether, or are the bones still good? And really, it's the minor upgrades. Things in technology will change, whether it's radar scans or anything else that makes these facilities run. That would be the upgrades. But the question remains, will the state be committed as it has been the past 6 years?
And bidding now would be for the 2038, or are we already looking at 2042 games?
I think the earliest would be 2038. 12 years down the road here.
And if not, then potentially 2042.
Right.
And Pat, you were also in Lake Placid for the Empire State Winter Games that were held the week before the Olympics got underway. That's a huge boost every year to Lake Placid. Hundreds, if not thousands, of athletes from around the state and their families come to compete.
Yeah, I was at the opening ceremonies, and the ice skaters versus the hockey players got into a kind of a fun debate, which one of us has more athletes here. So apparently there's about 800 skaters that participate. And this year had the most number of hockey players. I think they said it was about 600 hockey players. So that's just two sports.
Wow.
And you put those two sports together with family, coaches, staff, there's a lot of people coming into Lake Placid for these games.
And the opening ceremonies, as you mentioned, are always spectacular.
Yes, it was interesting. They have an indoor cauldron because they do the opening ceremonies in the Herb Brooks Arena. And so they have an indoor cauldron. And the person that they had light the cauldron was one of the original torchbearers from the 1980 Olympics. And she was going to be competing, I think, in a cross-country event with seniors in the Empire State Winter Games.
And of course, it's a chance to see some of New York's finest young athletes, and who knows, likely some future Olympians among them.
They did have a message from Milan Cortina Olympian that they put on the overhead projection saying, yeah, I participated in the Empire State Winter Games, and in a few years, maybe you can participate in the next Olympics. So really boosting the athletes' confidence.
And Alek, you reported on a report investigating the death of an inmate at the Clinton County Jail that concluded his death could have been prevented.
Yeah, the Commission of Corrections released that report 2 years to the day that Dustin Provost died in the Clinton County Jail. Much of that report taking issue with the procedures and policies in place at the jail, of course asking why he wasn't taken to the hospital sooner, complaining about the pain he had, and of course tasking the jail to carry out a policy overhaul and of course address some of those key questions, and also for the county to look at the fitness of the medical provider there at the jail as well. Asking Sheriff Favreau about this, of course, they're rejecting everything that's in the report, saying we did all that we could, and also, pointing to the influx of people that are coming to the jail, the inmates that have drug issues. He was pointing that out as a major issue going on right now, and then also pointing to another report that had come out that had cleared the jail of any wrongdoing as well.
This report came after an investigation by the Attorney General's office?
Right, so two different reports came out. The first one, the AG's office looking at whether or not there was any wrongdoing, and then of course the Commission of Corrections that took issue with the policies in place. And really the big key differences between these two. For the AG's office to prosecute, whether it be a police officer, department, state trooper, they have to look at direct causation. So an officer has to have had caused the death of an inmate or someone else. They didn't find that in this case. Now, the Commission of Corrections, their report is solely looking at the policies in place and was there a policy failure, were policies not up to what they should be, essentially.
Carly, you wrote a nice article about a 14-year-old boy in Beekmantown who saved his grandmother's life by performing CPR when she stopped breathing. Luckily, he remained calm and FaceTimed his grandfather, who, knowing that his wife was having heart issues, raced to the hospital to CVPH and then helped their grandson, Ryan Long, administer CPR through FaceTime. And two RNs came in, saw what was happening. They jumped on the call as well and talked him through performing CPR.
Yeah, and this is a story you probably wouldn't have heard of like 20 years ago. FaceTime, it's changing the way people do things and can help each other. And that was one of the most interesting parts of it because this is the next generation doing this, right? And so Beekmantown School District invited us out to basically a ceremony recognizing Ryan for helping his grandmother because he recognized she was in trouble. He contacted his grandfather. He kind of walked him through what to do. And then once he realized it was out of his hands, he went and he got two nurses who then took over, walked him through CPR, and he was able to save his grandmother and do CPR until paramedics got there. And so it was a very interesting, unique story, and it was very heartwarming.
It was, and he saved his grandmother's life. He's credited with saving her life.
Yeah, because she had stopped breathing up to that point where he had to do CPR. She wasn't breathing anymore.
And you mentioned, to recognize what Ryan did, some of his classmates at Beekmantown Middle School honored him, and then they also held a special assembly where they learned how to do CPR.
Yeah, yep. So the CBPH nurses who actually walked him through CPR over FaceTime, they were there. So they were there for the ceremony, and then other CBPH nurses and were in the auditorium, and they brought other 8th graders in there in groups and basically, walked them through CPR. They wanted to let them know how to do this in case they were ever found themselves in the same situation. So it was a very heartwarming story, but it also turned into a very informative one for other 8th graders at the school.
Yeah. Carly, Alek, Pat, thank you for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.